Well, as I mentioned at the top of the service, today the Christian church celebrates what's known as Ascension Sunday. We're remembering that story of Jesus ascending up into heaven. It signifies that the Easter season is coming to a close. As I mentioned, next Sunday is Pentecost, the beginning of a new liturgical season. The readings that we just heard this morning are actually not the readings from today's lectionary. They're actually from Thursday's lectionary. Because you see, the Ascension is always celebrated 40 days after Easter Sunday. So it always falls on a Thursday. Many of you know that Easter begins with Lent, which is 40 days before Easter Sunday. And now it concludes 40 days after Easter Sunday with the Ascension. Now, why, when they were putting together the church calendar, why did those early church fathers decide on these 40 days? Well, we know that 40 appears a lot in the Bible. So we know, for example, that the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years, that Moses was atop Mount Sinai for 40 days and nights, that it rained for 40 days and nights in the Noah's Ark story, that Jonah was in Nineveh for 40 days, and of course Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days and nights before he began his ministry. Now, of course, this repetition throughout the Bible of the number 40, it's not a coincidence. It's not by accident. I've told you before, the writers of Scripture were writing symbolically. And the ancient people, the Hebrew people, understood numbers to be symbolic. So when you read 40 in the Bible, it's not a literal number. It's a symbolic number. And symbolically or spiritually, what it represents is a time of testing, a time that it takes for the Spirit to do its work, for the Spirit to be made manifest. And some theologians have speculated that they came up with that number because pregnancy is 40 weeks long, the time it takes for new life to be birthed. And that, of course, is what the season of Easter is all about. These 40 days have been about new life. Now, if you've been with us since Easter Sunday, you know that every Sunday we've been hearing stories of Jesus' last words to his apostles before he ascends into heaven. He's giving them his last teachings. And as we just heard, it said that he needed to open up their minds to understanding Scripture. Because the apostles, after all this time with Jesus, they still don't get it. Which leads me to think that, once again, Scripture is not to be understood literally. Because if it was, the apostles would certainly understand the stories. I mean, stories like Adam and Eve and the snake and Noah's Ark and Jonah and the whale, those are little Bible stories we tell children. They understand them at a literal level. Jesus needs to open up their minds to Scripture because they're still understanding it from a childish way of thinking. And he needs to open their minds to understand these stories symbolically, spiritually. And once the apostles finally get it, then Jesus can leave them. As we just heard, as he's blessing them, a cloud comes and envelops him, and he's lifted up into the clouds as the apostles watch on in astonishment. Now, did that really happen? I mean, did Jesus really defy the law of gravity? Did the apostles really see his body go up into the sky? Well, the late theologian, Bishop John Shelby Spong, he once said in a sermon somewhat sarcastically, he said, "I wonder if Jesus went up past the moon and perhaps took a left at Mars." And our friend Father Richard Rohr said, "We shouldn't believe in what he called a rocket ship Jesus." Okay? That this isn't a beam me up Scotty moment. Okay? Now, I know we as modern people, we now know the laws of the workings of the universe more than the ancient people did. So it's hard for us to think that Jesus really physically rose up into the clouds. Now, is it possible? Of course, all things are possible with God. But my point today isn't to argue with you about whether this actually happens or not. What I'm trying to do is what Jesus was trying to do with his apostles. Open up your mind to understand the stories from Scripture, not literally, but symbolically, spiritually. So let's look at the Ascension story spiritually. The apostles on Easter Sunday morning discovered the empty tomb. And for this 40-day period afterwards, again, not a literal amount of time, but during this time of testing, this time of pregnancy, if you will, they are discovering who Jesus really was, what his teachings really meant, and they're also discovering their calling and their purpose. And during this time, they become filled with the Spirit, which we're going to celebrate next Sunday at Pentecost. So the ascension, you see, isn't just about Jesus rising up into the sky. It's about the ascension that happens within the apostles, how they grew in spirit. And of course, it's about our own ascension. Now, the first reading, as we heard, the famous story of Jacob's ladder, is also about ascension. Jacob is alone in the wilderness, and he has a vision of a ladder connecting earth to the heavens. Now, where is this ladder? How do we find it? Well, the first century saint, who's known as Saint Isaac the Syrian, he said, "The ladder to the kingdom of heaven is within you. Dive down deep, and you will discover the steps with which to ascend." He wrote that in the first century. Now, I know I get accused a lot on YouTube of teaching New Age spirituality. This is not New Age. Okay, this is Old Age, first century. Okay, the wisdom of the ages. The ladder to the kingdom of heaven is within you. Jesus told us that, but somehow we still don't get it. That's the place that connects the earthly with the spiritual. And as we heard in our words of integration and guidance this morning, Jacob's ladder had 7 steps. 7, like 40, is also a very spiritual number in the Bible. And it represents the steps or stages it takes for spiritual completion. So, for example, God created the world in 7 days. There are 7 steps to our spiritual ascension. And it's not a coincidence that our Eastern friends of the Buddhist and Hindu traditions talk of the 7 chakras, which are the energy centers that run along the spine. In prayer and meditation, when they're sitting in the lotus position, the root chakra is the one that's touching the ground at the base of the spine. The top chakra is known as the crown chakra, the peak of the head. It's why monks of old would shave their heads up there, and why Jewish rabbis would wear yarmulkes to protect that sacred space. But those 7 energy centers, the purpose of prayer and meditation for our Eastern friends is to align those energies of the earthly and the spiritual, to connect them. And it's the same for us as Christians. That's what Jacob's ladder is all about. The angels ascending and descending in Jacob's ladder. You know, angels are messengers from God. That's that flow of energy between the earthly and the spiritual that happens to us during prayer and meditation. Isn't that fascinating? Now, in Merriam-Webster's dictionary, if you look up the word ascension, it says that ascension is the process of rising to a higher and more powerful position. It's the process of arising. Our spiritual path, my friends, is a process. Some of us on the spiritual path, we're at the first rung of the ladder. Others of us are at the fourth or fifth rung. It's not a competition. It's not a race. Where you are is where you are. But here's the important thing. We must keep climbing. We have to keep ascending. That's the purpose of the spiritual life. How do we keep ascending? How do we get to the next rung? Prayer, meditation, spiritual reading, Bible study, selfless service to others. When we do these things on a regular basis, when we practice them, we ascend. We arise. We have a greater spiritual understanding. Our minds become open. And we feel more fully that connection with the divine. And so that's what I want to invite you to do in this last week of the Easter season, is to find time each and every day to enter into the kingdom of heaven that is within you. It's why Jacob says when he makes that discovery, he goes, "How awesome is this place? God is in this place and I didn't know it. This is the gate of heaven." My friends, find time each day to stand before that gate of heaven so that you can experience God's presence more fully, so that you can awaken and arise to that discovery of the divine light that is always with you and within you. Namaste.
Hello, everybody. This is Sal Sapienza, and I'm so excited to share with all of you that I've written a brand new book. The book is called Childish Thinking: How the Church Keeps Us Stuck in Sunday School. Now, the title Childish Thinking comes from Christian scripture, where we hear that if we wish to grow in spiritual understanding, then we must let go of childish ways of thinking. And yet so many Christians today, even after years of Bible study and Sunday services, still have a very elementary understanding of their faith. They still understand God as some old man with a long gray beard. They think heaven is a place up in the clouds with pearly gates, that the devil is some red guy with horns and a pitchfork, and that hell is a fiery place below the earth. Those are things that we tell children. None of those descriptions appear anywhere in the Bible. And so in Childish Thinking, I try to dispel many of those misnomers, and I explore topics such as God, Jesus, heaven, hell, sin, prayer, and resurrection from the higher perspectives of ancient Christian mystics and contemporary progressive theologians. After each chapter, there are prayers for quiet contemplation and questions for personal reflection and journal writing. Come learn how you can let go of old ways of thinking and begin to see things with new eyes. Come and learn how you can finally graduate from Sunday school. The book is available now on Amazon, and you can read the entire introduction at childishthinking.faith.